Welcome to Spare Room Studio, a place to create and relax. Hi everyone, it's Jackie at Spare Room Studio. Today I'm going to colour in the book The Creatures of Ken Matsuda. If you're not familiar with it, that's what the cover looks like. And it's the Hachette Heroes version. And today I'm going to colour in the koala, or that's the plan. So I've got some paper towel, I've got my small set of Caran d'Ache Neo Colour 2s, which was a lovely gift from Axic Fumbles on YouTube and Instagram. And I purchased a couple of open stock extra colours to go with that the other day, just to have a few different choices of greens. And I'm also going to use a new purchase that I spent some Christmas money on, and this is the Gansai Tambi, Kuretake Gansai Tambi Art Nouveau set. And if you're not familiar with how Gansai Tambi comes, it's a cardboard box, and you just lift that little plastic sleeve off. That's handy to keep because it keeps the dust and everything off of your paints. So I'll just put that to the side. And this is a curated set that is the Art Nouveau set. I've also got close to hand Pearl Colours and Gem Colours by Gansai Tambi. I'm not sure I will use that because the picture is an animal-based picture, but we'll see how we go. I figured I'd get them out and have them handy. I want to try this new set. So what I like to do, I've got several jars of water, some that I'm going to keep clean, some that I'm going to wash my brush out in. And I use a pipette, and I like to just squirt a bit of colour into those pans. And if you're not familiar with Gansai Tambi, these sets, actually the pans do lift out before I go wetting them all. So they are a plastic pan that comes out. You can buy these individually open stock, well you can in the art store that I went to. So you can put them into a bigger palette set if you wish to. And then I just like to pre-wet them with some water, clean water. And I just find that the pipette is a little bit quicker than trying to do it with your brush. And I like to do that first just to let the colours soften up a little bit before I want to use them. And that's how I get them started. So these are very cheap and they're very easy to use. So let's just put that aside. I've got the Neo Colour 2s. I've got a load of brushes in here that are some are quite old from days when I used to do watercolour painting, and some are very cheap ones. And I'm going to have a go with those because I've had a little play with them, and I found that the watercolour brush was a little bit, the water brush, these sorts of brushes were a little bit hard to control for some of the details that are in these pictures of Ken. So I'm just going to have a quick look and pick out a couple of brushes to use. I may not use very many of them, but I like to get a couple out just so that they're there and ready. Now I have a bit of a selection here that are, some were really cheap, some I've bought from the art store, some I've bought online. That there's a real mix of them. I don't have anything that's really terribly expensive. I can't seem to find one of my favourite brushes, or is that it there? I'll get a few out. So I hope that are we in close enough? Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. I'll put those off to the side. I've also got a couple of plastic pellets, a ceramic plate for mixing colours on, and this is the one that I've already tested some colours on, so I'll reuse some of that where I can, because you can keep re-wetting them and reusing them. So I'm going to use the left hand side as a guide for some of the colours, because I thought this Art Nouveau set is quite subtle, and it suited some of these colours here that are on Ken's version here. So let's see, how am I going to do this so I don't get too much splatter everywhere? I think I'm going to have my paints in front of me and the palette and the paper towel here ready to be careful. So let's start by picking up, and I'm going to use a not very big brush, but it's not tiny either. This one is a Teflon pointer. Don't think it has a number or anything on there, but I'll use that one to get started. So let's get a few pinks going. In fact, I haven't really got pink on that palette, so let's start this palette off with a bit of pinks. And what I like to do is keep rinsing these off in between, because what I'm going to do is lay a few different colours out, so when I'm getting them out of the paint pans, I like to make sure that my brush is clean. So I have one pot especially just for putting the dirty brush in, and a pot for clean water for mixing, and I think I will have this one as well. So this one here is called Potter's Pink. That one was pale pink, that was coral pink, and alizarin crimson. So I won't give you all the colours all the way through, because I'm only learning with these. It's not meant to be a tutorial. Now I want a bit of a yellowish colour, so I'm going to get, instead of yellow, I'm going to pick up, this is Ecru Beige. And to mix into that, we'll have a little touch of yellow as well. Okay, to start with, I'm just going to use that onto the dry paper. This is still very new to me, this paint, so my understanding is that if you use it undiluted, it's more like gouache paint, and the more water you add to it, the more it behaves like a watercolour. And what I plan to do here is use the picture on the left hand side as a guide for colours, but obviously these are not the same set of colours. And I'm going to try and get a mix of techniques and looks with those different paints if I can. So I'm also going to try some here where I wet the paper first. And I hope my water tub there isn't causing too much of a shadow. And you might be able to see the difference that made wetting the paper first and then dropping the paint into it, how it all bled differently. You might be able to hear that's my chair making a bit of noise there. And my husband is home, he's messing around doing a few chores, and you might hear him in the background too. So when I have this page to the left of me to work from for a colour palette, I work really differently to what I would normally when I'm just choosing colours on my own and just colouring as I go. So I'm just looking for a few areas to use that yellow on. Now with watercolour it is ideal to start on the left top and work across and down if you're right-handed, and the opposite way if you're left-handed. And so I'm making it a little bit harder for myself jumping around like I am. So I can see that when I use that paint without watering it down too much, it is a little bit more opaque, and it's lightening up the lines that are printed into the book. And I'm much more familiar with watercolour paints, and I haven't really worked with gouache at all. This is quite new to me, and I feel like there's going to be quite a learning curve with it. So of course I'm using that quite how can I put it, not diluted, so I haven't diluted that down a lot. It is very thick still, so obviously if I lighten that off with water, I'm going to get much more of a lighter colour and a watercolour effect. But I thought it might be fun to have a play with both. And then you can start to mix your different colours together. To come up with your own colour. And I'm still working quite wet. You can see there's a lot of water sitting on the paper there. But it's very much how I like to work the best. And I've actually bought some watercolour ground, which I haven't tried yet. This one is a Derivan Matisse brand, which I picked up in an art store. And I haven't used it yet, so I need to get prepping some pages with that to try it. But I have, explained quite a few times that I am lazy. when it comes to prep and doing these things. I'd rather be painting rather than prepping. And I'm a bit the same when we paint and decorate walls. I don't like doing the prep work, but I'm quite happy to get on with the painting work. So I think that's probably most of the pink areas to start with. So you'll see that I've probably mixed a little bit too much there. You don't need a lot of watercolour paint and it goes a long way. And I'm holding the brush sort of, a bit more further back and trying to keep my paint strokes rather loose and not too controlled at this stage. I want it to be very watercolour-like, and then I can always use coloured pencil at the end if I'm not happy with the level of detail on there. Okay, now there's a little bit of pink in the koala itself here. So this is what I like about these particular books. If you haven't got an art background and you don't know much about colour mixing or using different colours, these books can be very useful for showing you how different colours can be used to achieve a look. I'm going to actually go for the beige grey for the koala itself. So I'm just going to pick some of that up. And I need a lot more water with that than what I have been using. And what I'm going to do is switch to a slightly bigger brush. Get that wet. And I'm going to wet all of the koala first. So if you don't have any knowledge of colour theory and it's all new to you, if you have a book like this, what it can do is by looking at what the artist has done over here, all the different colours that he's used in the fur of the koala, if you was looking at a reference picture of a koala, you would not see, or you may do if there's reflected colours and so on, but potentially you would not see all the colours that this artist has used to create this image. And the point of the watercolour is that, you're not necessarily looking to create a photorealistic image of the koala. You want it to be believable and you want it to look like a real koala. But the artistic interpretation of it is the adding of all these different colours in here that you don't see in a real koala. But it's what works to make a watercolour or a drawing or a painting. That's what works to make it a very interesting image and painting. Now, I don't have all the same colours obviously in this set that Ken has used on his, which is why mine is going to look quite a bit different. But it's giving me some ideas of how to use the colours that I have in this particular set. So I'm going to pick up a bit of a bluish tinge here. And you can see that I'm working rather wet again, because if I was painting on a piece of watercolour paper, this is exactly what I would be doing. I do tend to use a lot of water. And you'll get people telling you don't do this in your books, but the result is that it will be very wrinkly and crinkly, and of course I can try to iron it later, iron it flat again, but it doesn't actually bother me personally that it's like that, so I say go for it. If you're prepared that you might bleed through, you've checked your image behind and you don't mind if you do bleed through, and you're just happy to go for it, this is when you can really start to make some breakthroughs and have some happy accidents when you allow yourself to really flood the paper like this when it comes to watercolour. But it's not without risks. It could potentially bleed through depending on what colours you're using and how you're using it. And I've had books that have started to fall apart because the water has gotten into the binding because I've used it so wet. So it's not without its risks at ruining your book, and that's why people say to you don't do it, because they don't want that to happen. But I'm also saying that sometimes you do have to risk these things happening to get the progress and get the results that you want. And I shall have to have a go with that watercolour ground, as I said, and just try it in a few books and see on different paper whether I'm going to be able to use this particular technique of mine without wrecking books too much in the future. Sorry, it's really difficult to get a train of thought going when you're working really loosely like this. I have trouble trying to keep that train of thought going. Now that's starting to pull there because the paper is so wrinkly and buckled, so that colour is actually pooling there, and it's not necessarily where I wanted it, but I'm going to let that go. If it bothered you, you could get a piece of paper towel and just dab some of that colour up. I'll show you how to do that. Like I could use the corner here and just soak up a little bit of that water. Like that. So you can already see there's a very different feel about it, because this palette of colours is really different to the one that Ken obviously worked with. So I'm going to go back to my smaller brush, and I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the pale aqua now. And I'm just going to put it into some of these areas where there's a bit of a blue look happening. And it might be a little bit too soon because that's still very wet. It's all going to bleed. I might have to wait for that to dry before I can actually put some of that bluish look in there. I've mentioned this recently on another video that I've recorded, and it may or may not be up on the channel just yet, but something that's really important to keep in mind with these types of books especially is that the artist has created the artwork first, and then these colouring books have come as a result of those images. So, you know, Ken would have painted this first, and then it's been transposed to become a colouring page by, you know, taking off the strongest, most dominant lines of the image. You know, probably not this one so much, but oil paintings especially, it doesn't always transfer well, in that what you're seeing here doesn't translate well to a line drawing. And especially if you're going to colour it with a medium that's different to what the original one was painted with, it's going to be really hard to replicate that look unless you're using the precise same paints and colours, or medium and colours. You know, it's going to be very hard to replicate the look of an oil painting with coloured pencil, and it can be very difficult, near on impossible, to replicate watercolours with coloured pencil. So people get really frustrated when they've got this image off to the side and they're trying to mimic it. If you're not using that same medium, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to do that. And so it's better to just use it as a guide for the placement of the colours, and have a go yourself with interpreting it your own way. Because it soon becomes a exercise in complete frustration when you're trying to create a look with a different medium. And some people are very good at mimicking and following, these sorts of things really precisely. But personally, I'm not always good at getting the same techniques that the artist has. So I just have to think about looking at the way that they've used colour and where they've used colour, and then be satisfied that, you know, mine's going to look different, but I'm using it as a guide. So now I'm just starting to mix this selection of colours that I've got together to get darker versions of what's already there and see what I can create. This is quite a limited set and quite unusual, distinct colours. So I'm not necessarily going to get everything that I want out of this set, which is why I decided to pick up the Neo colours as well, in case I wanted to use any of those. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of a brighter, this is pea green, and I'm just going to use a little bit of that in with the darker green. Now that's quite undiluted, so it looks a little bit more like the gouache look. So I think this is going to have to be in a couple of parts, because I'm going to need to get the hairdryer out on this, or wait for it to dry, because I've got it very wet. It is hot where I am today, so we've got the air conditioner on, and the airflow might help dry that off, but it's still going to take a bit of time. So technically all these colours should work together because they're a curated set that have been put together to be used in a certain way. So they should all go together in terms of, you know, the colours going together and the shades and the tones and so on working together. So this very washy, loose watercolour effect might be a step too far for some people. But with watercolour, quite often you need to start out quite loosely and then let that layer dry, and then you come back once it's dry with a smaller, finer brush and start to pick out some of the details and portray some of the details better on a subsequent layer of paint. And it depends too whether you want to work very, very loosely with your colours, or whether you want to, pardon me, get that more opaque, solid, very stable sort of effect or look, whereas I'm sort of at the moment going for a very, very loose, impressionistic type look. And don't forget, if I was working this way with a watercolour paper, it would look completely different again. This paint is actually seeming to sit on the surface of the paper a little bit. I'm just getting a little bit more, let's pick up a bit of that green there. You know, the trick is to try and get a bit of a variety of greens going. So where that first layer has started to dry, I can come back with a few extra colours. But then it will get very wet again, and it's going to get to the point where I can't progress until that's all dry. But hopefully you're getting a feel of starting that first layer of paint very lightly and then building up the colours as we go. Let's pick up a little bit of this beige grey again. Now that hasn't got a lot of water in it, it's quite opaque, so that's what I'm going to use here for the start of the claws. So you can match the intensity of the colour and whether you go for that opaque, heavy look, depending on what the object is. So, you know, it might be okay to do a heavy, darker look on his nose, for example, which is solid and black and, you know, shiny in real life. But flowers are a little bit more ethereal. Certainly a butterfly is, so they need to sort of be starting out with a much lighter base of colour. And not so solid and not so heavy, whereas some of the leaves and the greenery and the twigs and so on may be a little bit heavier and darker. So you can match that intensity of the paint and the colour to the actual item. So let's see if we can start getting in some of these purples, and then I will let it dry. So I'm just going to pick up, this is, I call it mauve, but the Americans pronounce it mauve. But here where I live, we tend to say mauve. And this is called old mauve. So I'm running out of places to match mix my colours. So I might have to put that onto the plate here. So I might put that here. And I'll just put a little bit of extra water into there. And I'm going to wet some of these petals first and then drop a bit of extra colour in there. And I need an even smaller brush than that. So let's pick up some of that lighter colour. And that's dry at the end there, and I'm dragging it back into the wet area, so then it's blending with that darker colour. It's definitely a learning curve with this paint. It's very different to what I'm used to with pure watercolour. And of course the paper quality has a lot to do with that too. When I was painting with proper watercolours, I was doing it on watercolour paper and not colouring books. So I'm going to start there with that lighter colour. That last one I started with the darker first and then went to the light, but it definitely works better for me if I start with that lighter colour and then drop the darker in. You know, for the way my brain works, that order just works much better. You can see I'm trying not to overwork those brush strokes too much at this stage, trying to keep it a little bit looser. And some of these leaves have got purple in them as well. And let's have a look, let's move that out the way. It's just as well I've got a big old dining table here, because the way that I've got everything spread out, I think I'd be, you know, struggling a little bit on a regular desk here at the moment. Okay, I think I might leave that to dry and come back to that. So as always, I'll say goodbye, and then if I can't stitch the videos together, you will see them as standalone parts. But I don't really want to blast the hairdryer in your ear. I'm just going to put a little bit more, I need a little bit more pink, I think. I didn't come back and do that. That centre of the flower there. And we've got a really, really light wash of purple and blues. Where is that blue? So you can see I'm just constantly rinsing that brush off, re-wetting it. And I've forgotten about those pink flowers up the top there, haven't I? We might make those more purple. Let's grab a little bit of the pink off that other palette. So yeah, I just wanted to show you you know, working in a very loose manner. So that you can see just how much you sort of have to let go to get some of these loose washes and so on that you see in some of these examples in books. You do have to loosen up your style quite a bit to allow for getting the same sort of look or effect sometimes. And you really don't need very much paint. Okay, that was his claws there again, so let's pick up a bit of that grey. I think it's called grey beige, beige grey, something like that. So it's a very warm grey and beige, you know, sort of combined. Okay, so I'm going to dry that, and I will come back to you guys and show you how it looks when it's dry. Show you the back of the page, because I can't really do that while it's still quite damp. And then I'll decide what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I'll come back to you really soon. Hi everyone, so I'm back with part 2 of this particular page in the Creatures of Ken Matsuda, the Hachette Heroes version, and I've laid down a base of Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours in the Art Nouveau set. And I've got palettes and bits of paint everywhere, but I wanted to show you the other side of the page, but of course this is the other side of the page, so there's been absolutely no bleed through or change to that page. And I'd like to continue on with this a bit further now. So using a hairdryer on a hot summer's day, It really does heat things up a bit, but anyway. So my colour palette, of course, is very different to the example in the book by Ken Matsuda, because I'm working with this particular set. Being a new set to me, I wanted to try it, and obviously the colours are very different to what he's used there, but I'm going to continue on because I want it to be inspired by this page but not exactly the same. And what I plan to do now is I need to get some smaller brushes and start putting in some of the details with the thicker paint that is not so diluted. So I'm going to have a look in my pot of brushes here and see if I can find, I think a lot of my very fine brushes have got a bit frayed and a bit old now, because well, there must be over 25 years old, some of these. And brushes, you know, providing you look after them, just found myself a pencil there, providing you look after them, if you get decent brushes from an art store and you know, they're good quality brushes, as long as you look after them, they will last you quite some time. I'm not professing that any of mine here are terribly expensive. I think in the beginning I did buy a couple that were a little bit more expensive because I'd been encouraged to do that by an art teacher. But because I used to do a lot of portraits and figures and so on, and I wanted to get a really good lifelike effect, and I used to also put a lot of flowers around them and so on, I needed some very small brushes for details. So I'm just going to get another clean piece out because I put my hand in some wet paint before and ended up getting that a bit mucky. But so let's get the palettes that I had to start with and start using those same paints again now to try and get a little bit more detail and colour into it. So I'm just going to add a little bit more yellow to this one because my flowers were all looking very similar, using the same colours, and of course, you know, not all varieties of flowers are exactly the same. So I'm just going to come back now and rework into that, and where that paint is a little bit thicker and heavier, I can actually smooth that out and rework that a little bit as I'm going over it. So unlike your ink tints, for example, where once they are dry they don't move, they stay put, when you're using something like this and a watercolour, sorry, just thinking, you know, watercolours, when you re-wet the page it will keep moving again. So this is a palette that I started with another page off camera, and that paint was still left in the palettes there, and I'm able to re-wet those and reuse them. So you don't need a lot of paint to start with, but if you do that and you find that you leave a little bit in the well and it dries up, you can reuse it and re-wet it and reuse it again. So watercolours become quite economical in a way. They start off being a little bit pricey when you first purchase them, especially good quality ones. You might think to yourself that it's a lot of money and you don't want to invest all that money into it, but they are reasonably good quality, good value when you think that you can keep re-wetting. You keep your palette clean, So if it's sitting somewhere that's dusty and dirty, obviously they're going to get contaminated and not be such a good idea to do that. But if you keep your palette clean, maybe a bit of Glad wrap, cling wrap or whatever it's called where you live, a little bit over the top of it to keep it clean. You can come back and re-wet it and work with it again. All is not lost. And I'm just trying to get a bit of a different variety of colours and looks to these leaves now, so that each leaf is not identical. I don't want it to all be identical. Just getting a little bit more detail, and if there is anywhere that is particularly blobby, where I've used it a little bit more opaque and I don't like the effect and it looks a bit blobby, then I can come back and work on that. So this is where the beauty of working lightly with your first layer becomes apparent, because now I'm going around the shape of the leaf and leaving that light colour in there as it originally was, and then just darkening up around it so that that negative shape starts to show, instead of working dark in the first layer and then not being able to lighten it up. So you can choose whether you want to leave it really loose and washy, or whether you want to come back and tidy up some of those edges or whatever, because you've left it quite light on that first pass through with the paint. You've left yourself with some options of what you can do further down the track, whereas if you go in really dark with the watercolour in the beginning, it's very, very difficult to correct any errors without coming in with maybe mixing some white paint into it to make it more opaque, and then you lose your watercolour effect. With this particular paint, it's not so vital because it is acting like gouache as well. You've got that option to come and make it much more opaque. But a true watercolour, you would be struggling to remedy any bad errors if you had gone in really dark on that first pass. So you will probably notice that on this particular second layer, I'm not necessarily using the wet in wet now. I'm now using the damp brush or wet brush onto the dry paper and using it that way. So the very washy watercolour effects are there, and it's up to me now whether I want to cover them up or preserve them, and then put the details in with the wet brush. So I had a little bit of a red colour here that I used on another page, and I'm just going to use that to make that a bit more like an orange there. I might also use that to darken up some of these areas. We'll just see if we can tidy this little rose up here because it's lost all of its definition. I'm a bit rusty with a brush. I've been using the water brushes, but a brush like this I'm a little bit rusty, so I might need to perhaps use a pencil to try and get some nice crisp edges where I'm struggling a little bit. So you can, with watercolour, leave that little bit of white paper wherever you want a highlight. So I don't want to lose all of the areas where it's very light and washy. I want to leave some of it very loose like that. And you can have a bit of colour on your brush and not be overly wet, and it's more what they call dry brushing, where you use a very slight amount of colour and water on your brush to drag it across the dry paper and then get some different textures with that. So I need those purples back again. I noticed that I had missed these leaves down here. So that paint has separated there on the plate. The colours have separated a little bit while it's been sitting there, which is quite interesting, very pretty. Now let's just sort of darken up a few areas if we can to suggest some shadows and get some definition going. And that was actually a purple flower as well. So it's a little bit tricky to decipher what's going on here with this butterfly on top of the flower. It's being a little bit better, and we need a little bit of yellow in the centre of the flower, and so I've got a little bit of yellow there. And when it comes to this butterfly, it's quite a rich blue on the picture there. I'm going to pick up a little bit of, let's have a look, cobalt turquoise light, sorry, not Turkish light, turquoise light. And I'm going to use a little bit of that. So as I keep saying, I don't have the same colour palette as what Ken worked with, so mine's going to look quite different. But I do need something a little bit darker, so we'll go with the greyish blue. We'll mix a little bit of that with the turquoise and make that a little bit darker for the darker. I'm just getting a little tiny bit on my brush. In fact, that's probably way too much. And I'm going to mix some of that. And I'm going to need to get some black, I think, or something darker from another set, because the darkest colour in this one is shadow green. I don't really want to put green into it. We could try it and just see what it's like. It's very dark. Oops, there goes my brush. So yeah, that is a little bit darker, but I might actually use some of that around for the shadows on the koala itself actually. Just going to get rid of some of that excess off of my brush. And I'm just going to try and blend that out a little bit. I'm just going to let that feather out a little bit there. And again, just add some extra water and feather that out. So what I'm looking for is the areas where Ken has done some heavier cross hatching, plus his picture over on the left, to give me some ideas of where it needs to be a little bit darker. You know, to start getting that more dramatic shadow. So I'm just going to wet this first because I don't want it too solid. And I'm just going to start dabbing that darker colour in there. In fact, I was thinking I needed black or a dark grey from somewhere else, but I'm quite liking the look that this is creating. Okay, I've just got to let Hamish out. There you go, buddy. So I've got the door shut to try and limit any noise that's coming from what my husband's doing, and then Hamish has woken up and wanted to go out, so I'm actually quite liking having that darker green there, so I'm going to blot some of this off of his nose. Sorry for my arm going underneath the camera, but it's very difficult. I don't know how watercolorists have this set up so that people can see what they're doing and they've got everything to hand. So I'm going to just darken this up with the more greenish blue. It is actually called shadow green on the palette. So instead of black, we're going to go for this as the start of our deepest, you know, shadowy areas. So what I'm doing there is I've got the paint on the brush and it's not very diluted, and I'm actually just patting that along really gently along that edge there. And we're going to have to go for some darker colours to get some definition going on around here. So if you think about some of my other colourings that I've done, especially when it comes to alcohol markers, the water-based markers, my coloured pencil and so on, I go for a deeply dark saturated look, very vibrant saturated look with that most of the time. And so I'm having to restrain myself a little bit with these colours to come back to those watercolour roots, because I've gotten out of the habit of thinking that way. And because these paints can be used quite opaquely, the temptation is to still keep using them really dark and opaque. So I'm really having to think about keeping it lighter and more watery and so on. You know, like staying sort of mindful of the fact that I'm very close to overworking things if I'm not careful. So that's the danger when you work in one particular medium all the time and then you try to change to another one. It's like a memory muscle thing, you know. You've got to try and remind yourself, no, hang on, I'm not using alcohol markers, I'm not using coloured pencil, I don't want this to be too solid, I want it to be light, I want bits of the paper to show through, you know, I want some light colour as well as vibrant deep dark colour, because the impulse is to sort of keep working and working and working and get it darker and darker and darker. And watercolour is really, although you can do it, you know, you can use your watercolour that way. It's ideal for lightening up and using that different look. So why not utilise that? I'm just going to put a few more blues in around here. So I think as I get a little bit more confident with them again, and re-find my touch again, I do think this will be quite a quick way to work. But at the moment I'm sort of floundering a little bit because I feel like I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone with these particular paints. But I think once I get a feel for them and understand how they work a little bit better, it's certainly going to be a nice quick way to work and get some different effects going. And certainly this colour palette is very different to what I normally work with. So that's why I picked them up, because I wanted that bit of variety. Now, of course, if you're clever with your colour mixing, it doesn't matter what set of paints you've got. You could mix any colour. With a basic set of primary colours, you can mix many different colours if you've got a little bit of colour theory. Buying curated sets is, you know, a bit more of a easier way out, so that you don't have to think about it and mix your own. But if you've got a set of watercolours and you've got some good primary colours, you can mix an awful lot of colours. And I would suggest that perhaps to get these more muted Art Nouveau colours, you might have to mix a little bit of white in with them. To get them sort of a little bit semi-opaque. But yeah, you can mix just about any colour you want with a good set of primary colours. So that little bit of noise you can hear is my husband's doing some tidying up outside. We're going to be having a hard waste collection coming, so he's back to work tomorrow. So he's just doing a bit of tidying up to get it all out of the way. Before he goes back to work. So we've had some very lazy days. We didn't have any holidays planned this year because of having the dog. It was a bit harder to go away or get someone to look after him with him being like he is. So we've just had some really lazy days, especially on the hot days. We've just been lazing around, and it's been a well-earned break for him because he was very tired looking when he finished work just before Christmas. I think, you know, at the end of the year, a lot of people find that their workload ramps up a bit because everybody wants everything done prior to the Christmas break or Christmas shutdowns, and it leaves everybody a little bit frazzled. I, of course, don't have any excuse for that because I don't go out to work, but it has been nice to take that time off with him and just relax and do not very much. So I haven't been colouring at all. I had a bit of a colouring slump. I found after colouring all those pages that I wanted to get done for Christmas that I had sort of got to the point where I just needed a break from colouring. And I've been reading. So I got myself a couple of art instructional books, like a Christmas gift to myself, and I've been reading those, watching lots of YouTube and relaxing. Okay, so that's darkened up that area quite nicely now, so I don't think we need too many more darks in, to be honest. It does look darker on screen, and I'm sorry about the shadow here, but that's my water pot casting a shadow, but it does look darker on screen than it is in real life, I think. So I think what I might do next is I might draw a bit of a border in, because I don't want to go right up to the edge. And I'm going to paint the background like this one is, probably in the pale, this sort of pale pink. Just because that's not normally a colour I would choose, so I think I will do that. See how it looks, and then I might come back and put a bit of coloured pencil on there as well. Yeah, I think that might be what I do. So I can't remember if I showed you any of the effects close up, so before I finish off here, I've got a section down here that's still a bit wet. You can see the shine of the water on the paper. So you can see some of these watercolour effects that I've got going on in the fur. And I'm going to leave a lot of that, I think. I like that. The foot needs a bit of work done to it. But yeah, that's probably a little bit, I think it's coming up a little bit darker. No, that's not right either. I'm trying to play with the lighting so that it shows you, but it's probably coming up a little bit more solid and vibrant than it is in real life. That's starting to look more like it really is. So I'll dry that off again, and I will come back for part 3, or I'll hopefully be able to tack it on. So I'm back with part 3, or if I've been able to stitch these together, we're carrying on. And I've decided that I've got a couple of polychromos pencils here, Burnt Carmine and Payne's Grey. I've also got an Ohuhu fine line drawing pen in the 0.05, the tiniest nib, because I've gone over a few areas around the edges that have lost their crispness due to the nature of this paint being, you know, a mix between a gouache and a watercolour. It's actually covered up some of the lines and lost the crispness. And as I've mentioned many times in the past, I'm not a fan of covering up lines in colouring books. So I will reinstate some of those areas where we've lost some of the detail, and you know, just go over some of it to make it a little bit more defined. So that's all I'm planning to do with that pen. And any fine line pen, particularly if you're going to use more water, you need a waterproof one. But if you're using this as the final stage and you're not going to add any more colour, you can get away with any fine line pen. But this one that I happen to have here is an Ohuhu one. And I'm just putting in some of those sort of details that have been lost along the edges. So what I did was I dried it off with a hairdryer, came back in, drew a very rough border 1 centimetre in from the edge all the way around. And I used the pink, the pale pink here, very, very thickly and not diluted at all. It's actually gone a bit shiny in parts, which I will show you at the end when I pick the book up. As I've mentioned, I'm new to this particular type of paint. It isn't like a true traditional watercolour paint, I don't think. If anyone is a watercolourist, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's definitely heavier and thicker and more opaque than regular watercolour paint that we know traditionally. So it's definitely been a learning curve for me. In the future, if I plan to use the Kuretake and do a solid background like this, I'd just go for acrylic paint in the background. I wouldn't use the Gansai Tambi for that again. I think it's a bit of a waste, you know, just for a flat solid painting like that. A matte acrylic paint would have sufficed and done the job probably a little bit better, if truth be told. So yeah, I just would go around and reinstate some of these lines that are not so clear, especially if it's affecting the clarity of the image so that it's making it harder to read. I would definitely go around and reinstate the lines. So I'm not ending up with what I would deem to be a true watercolour out of this. If it was a true watercolour, all the colours would be transparent to me, and you know, layers of colour built up. There would be no opaque colour if it was a true watercolour for me. And that's a personal opinion again. It's not to say that that is the way to do it, because I have never been known to actually do things traditionally as they're meant to be. This is my preference and my take on working with watercolours. And as a rule, I would prefer to see you know, less of the opaqueness and more transparent colour would be more to my liking. But having said that, for what it has actually turned out to be, I'm not unhappy. It's just different to what I'm used to. And as with anyone and anything, as we expand our skill set, we end up getting out of our comfort zone a little bit. And sometimes there's an adjustment period when you work with different materials and different books, different styles, different artists and so on. There's always a bit of a period of adjustment until that becomes second nature, and then you wonder why you never liked it to begin with. You know, sometimes we never adjust and never like it, and that's okay. So put that aside. So what I thought I'd do with the burnt carmine, I just feel like I need a little bit of deeper colour in the centre of these flowers. I've done mine very different to the image on the left, of course, but for what I'd like it to read like, that just needed that little bit of extra something. And so I felt like the burnt carmine was a good compromise for that. Because I don't want to lose all this transparency, you know, the bits that I have managed to get nice and light and transparent. I don't want to cover it up completely. And then I've got the Payne's Grey just to go into some areas to get in that little bit darker without bringing a black in. So I felt like this butterfly particularly was getting lost. And it isn't all that easy to read on the original one, to be fair. It isn't the most defined part of the image, but I would like it to just be a little bit more defined from that flower there. And his nose just felt like it needed that little bit more around there. And I don't know, I just felt like this looked like he had a bit of pink eye rather than how it probably should look. So of course, once you start darkening up one area, you do start to feel like you need to go into some of the other areas to get that balance. Otherwise you just look like you've got one area that's particularly dark and draws your eye, and you know, it loses the clarity of what the story or the picture is about. I'm just going to do that. I feel like all of this is looking okay. And sometimes I find when I stand back and look through the viewfinder of the camera that I can actually see those lights and darks in a much better way. So, so possibly a little bit in. Just to make that a little bit easier for the eye to read what's going on. I feel like we might need a little bit different grey in there. So I'm actually going for Cool Grey 3, and I'm just going to put a little bit more to gradually work that out. I don't want to cover up all of those watercolour effects again. And I didn't colour that, so just to put a bit of colour on there, I'll do that. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that now. You can very easily overwork these things, so I do need to learn to know when to stop. So a good thing to do when you feel like that's an issue, let me just put my pencils down. when that's an issue for you, sometimes it's a good idea to just, you know, step away from the book for a little while. Even close it up, you know, work on something else, and then just come back at the last minute and decide whether you think that's, you know, finished or not. Not the last minute, but you know what I mean. And at another time, come back, because you can always adapt and say, you know, I'm going to change this about a picture and come back at a later date once you've made your mind up. But if you're unsure and then you act and it's not really what you want, it can be really disappointing if at that stage of a page that you feel like you've done something you shouldn't have done. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding that little bit of extra blue. That was ultramarine blue on the Neocolor 2, because there was nothing like that in that Art Nouveau set, and I just feel like that has lifted that little butterfly up a bit more than what I could do with that Art Nouveau set. So there's 24 colours, I think it is. Let me have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, 24 colours in the Art Nouveau set. So it is a little bit limited. But that's how it's worked with just minimal coloured pencil. That little bit of extra Neocolor 2 on there. And I'm going to show you how the background has dried. See if I can get to show you where it's gone shiny. See how that little bit of shininess to it? So in hindsight, if I do this again, I would more than likely choose to use a matte acrylic for a background, to do it that way. And I've just done strokes, you know, here, there and everywhere. I didn't want to try and mimic this smooth look because I was never going to achieve that with that paint. So I've gone for deliberately textured, and you can see the remaining areas of the watercolour that I've left untouched. These bits here where I had loose and washy, and then I've come back with some solid on top. I could probably put more detail in there, but the point of the watercolour, as I keep trying to find the right words to describe what I mean, is that this is very much precisely the nature of watercolour that I want. I don't want it to be perfect, because if you have a look at Ken's page, let's see if we can just zoom in. You know, he's got a lot of these watery, blobby looks as well. Obviously much more intentional than what mine are, but that's how Ken's looks. And then here you've got mine over here. Okay, so the colours are different, but I've tried to get the same sort of effect. So there you go, that one's finished. My first complete page on camera for you with the Kuretake Gansai Tambi Art Nouveau set of watercolours. And there it is. I'm not too unhappy with it. There's obviously things I need to learn to do better, but I can live with that. So that's it for this one, guys. I shall see you really soon with another page and more of these watercolours. Thanks for watching. Take care, everyone. Bye now.